Okay, welcome back. So we'll be doing a refutation to the Christian apologist about the sun apparently going into murky water. And of course, this is a Christian contradiction that they love bringing. These Christians love bringing up this contradiction against the Quran. And Brother Yahya dealt with this beautifully in his video. And I'll put the hyperlink below this video. And you can actually see how he's given a response to this attack against the Quran. And not sure if you're aware, but a Christian has tried to give a rebuttal to this. So my video will be in defense of Brother Yahya Snow's video, countering the Christian critic. Just like he wants to critic Brother Yahya's videos, I will have the opportunity to critic his videos, and let's put him in shape. So let's go ahead and refute the Christian critic. We'll go through his videos, I'll pause it and give a rebuttal, God willing. So let's go straight into YouTube where the video can be found. So then we could hopefully give the complete rebuttal. We'll go point by point through his videos. So let's start. Just to give you an insight, just in case you haven't seen Brother Yahya's video, Brother Yahya's video shows that, against David Wood, Christian apologist, he tried to make the same argument here as Sah al-Nom, who's another Christian apologist. So Brother Yahya countered David Wood's arguments because David Wood obviously used a hadith to strengthen his argument that the Quran, when it says in Surah 18 through to 83, chapter 18 through to 83 through to 86, where Dhul Qarnayn travels to a destination, and at this destination it is said that the sun was setting at a murky water, and this is through the Quran. And of course the Christians want to take this as something literal and not metaphorical. It seems that everything in the Bible is literal, is metaphorical when there's a contradiction, but when it comes to the Quran, it has to be literal. And so basically Brother Yahya brought up the hadith in response to David Wood, because David Wood tried to use a hadith, and that hadith is from Abu Dar. And it narrates, it reports that the sun does in fact go into the muddy water. It says it sets in a spring of water and so forth. But of course Abu Dar is only narrating what the Quran is saying. And however, Abu Dar has dropped this narration where it says it sets in a spring of muddy water. Abu Dar has actually dropped that part from different narrations. So Brother Yahya showed that it can't be used as evidence because there was also a contradiction between the narrations of Abu Dar, claiming it to be somehow literal and so forth. Well, the Christian was defeated on that argument, and as a Christian gets defeated on an argument, what they do is they appeal to tafsir as evidence. I mean, can you imagine this, using a tafsir for your defense, as if that even helps your case? Instead of using the Quran, right, using the Quran only, or the hadith, they use now the tafsir. Of course, the Quran didn't work, the hadith didn't work. Now we'll go to the third source, tafsir, to try and the tafsir is just basically it's not God-given inspiration, it's basically an opinion. So anyway, we'll play his little entertainment and we'll go through it. He's a Muslim. Okay. So yes, he's narrating the hadith, obviously, and he understands that it's apparently wrong. Well, it is, and he doesn't even try and defend it. He just merely goes into Brother Yahya's comments, and Brother Yahya also put forward the argument that it's not literal, it's not meant to be understood as literal. So then the Christian apologist Sah al-Nom is trying to attack Brother Yahya to go through the tafsir now to show that it was literal. So let's go through it. Okay, so we'll just forward it. Let's now see.
The first tafsir we have a record of came in the year of 104 of the Islamic calendar, which correlates to the year 722. This tafsir is called Tafsir Mujahid. This was written roughly 90 years after the death of Muhammad. What's interesting is that it interprets the verse exactly as it's written. All it does is give us more detail on what this spring is. He tells us it's blackened and muddy. So when do Muslim scholars start to tell us that the sun doesn't actually set in a muddy spring?
Okay, so notice he's quoting the first tafsir, which comes nearly 90 years later, and I was waiting for him to say, "Oh, look, they're saying it actually means literal," and when he says he interprets it the same, what he's basically saying is he's interpreting the Quran exactly what it says the same. The tafsir doesn't even mention the term metaphorical, nor does it even mention it to be literal. So I don't know why he's even bringing that up. He's bringing it up only to make the argument that it's not talking about it being in a non-literal sense. It's not talking about it being in a metaphorical sense. Well, it doesn't matter if the tafsir interpreters and so forth do not mention it. It doesn't really matter. I don't know why he's going there.
Second one, which appeared 15 years later, no, they still didn't have a clue. How about the third one?
Right.
No. Fourth? No. Fifth? No. Sixth? No. 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 Now here at number 11, in chronological order, we have the tafsir of Tabari. It's arguably considered the most credible tafsir of the Quran, and all other major tafsirs like Ibn Kathir, Qurtubi, Jalalain, and so on borrow heavily from Tabari's tafsir. What he did was gather together all the narrations he could find that related to any given verse. For verse 1886, Tabari gathers an astonishing 15 narrations from early Islam to describe this single verse. We can see by reading these that all Muhammad's companions clearly took the verse as meaning the sun set into the spring. Their only differences were in regards to the nature of this spring. Most claimed it was black and muddy, some said it was a warm spring, some said it was all three, warm, muddy and black. So Tabari and all the people who mentioned this verse had no idea this wasn't literal. Let's keep checking.
When we go to Tafsir al-Tabari, did you know that Tafsir al-Tabari mentions on page 8 of his book that the stuff that he mentions is not attributed to al-Tabari, and its authenticity can be questioned because most of its isnad is either damaged or not accurate. So when you're quoting al-Tabari, which is 310 years later, it's not really helping you. You're only showing opinionated opinions, and you're saying that they're Muhammad's companions. Well, name those companions. Why don't you name those companions? Was it Ibn Abbas? Was it Umar ibn Khattab? Was it Zayd ibn Thabit? Was it Ali radiallahu anhu? Who's actually interpreting it and saying it's literal? Nowhere in al-Tabari do they actually describe it to be literal. They say, of course, it's setting in murky water because they're only describing what the Quran has actually relayed to us. But it doesn't mean that they understood it to be literal, nor does the Quran say it was understood to be literal. Let's continue.
Number 12, no. Number 13, no. We now get to number 14, a whole 350 years after Muhammad's death. 350 years. This tafsir is attributed officially to a scholar called Sulaiman al-Tabarani. This is where we get the first hint. It claims Dhul Qarnayn saw it setting into the water because he couldn't have actually reached the place where it set. Now, this is embarrassing enough as it is to all those who claim that the verse meant something other than what it actually says. It took 14 tafsirs and 350 years after Muhammad's death for Muslims to start suggesting it was from Dhul Qarnayn's perspective. But the problem is, this tafsir attributed to Sulaiman al-Tabarani is controversial and
But notice he's saying it's controversial and so forth. It's actually proving my point. They're following opinions, right? And the fact that he mentioned that it's through his appearance and his opinion of what Dhul Qarnayn saw, it's from his appearance. That's what he saw. Because remember, God doesn't speak always in cosmological terms. You know, oh yes, the sun is going to rotate around the earth is going to rotate around the sun. You know, the Quran is not going to do that, right? So he's going to describe Dhul Qarnayn from a humanistic perspective of what actually appeared to him. And you're proving my point. There are scholars or there are historians and so forth. You can see that there's clear differences of opinion raising from 310 onwards up to 450 onwards. These are just based on opinionated ideas. And how is that even evidence? I mean, when do Christians actually consider an opinion part of revelation? It's not. For all I care, even if they claimed it was literal, it doesn't mean it was literal. It's still their opinion. I mean, for goodness sakes, please use some common sense.
Largely dismissed as a fraud that was actually written between 500 to 600 years after Muhammad's death. It was written by other people who tried to give it legitimacy by attributing it to Sulaiman al-Tabarani, and Muslims who have investigated this have reached this conclusion, not me. I'll provide a link, albeit in Arabic, to the arguments against this particular...
Yeah, of course you'll provide it in Arabic, and like I said, it doesn't prove a point. Anyway.
Tafsir. As this one was widely regarded to have been written way later, let's keep looking. Did the genuine 14th tafsir, 306...
And by the way, guys, you know how he's saying it was written later? From 333 up until the first tafsir, none of them are actually saying it was literally too. So keep that in mind, because a Christian is lying now. Okay, so he's trying to say in the earlier tafsirs, you know, again, we don't get whether they believed it was literal or metaphorical. It doesn't make any mention of that. And he even went through the details that the only details or differences they had was they were trying to predict whether it was black or murky water and what the color and this and that. But they didn't go into the detail whether it was literal or non-literal. So I don't even know why you're even using the first 13 tafsirs or first 11 tafsirs as evidence, because it doesn't actually prove your point.
65 years after Muhammad's death, figure out this verse was not literal? No. Number 15? No. 16? No. 17? No. 18? No. The 18th tafsir actually tells us that the muddy spring propels the sun through the underworld to reach the place of sunrise. This shows why an apologist argument fails, which claims that if it set into a spring, it would have needed to have come out from the same spring, and that wasn't mentioned in the Quran, therefore that isn't the case. But what they're forgetting is that it was understood that it was propelled from the west spring through the underworld all the way to the east spring where it rises. But what we also see, more importantly in this tafsir, written by Thalabi in the year 427 of Hijrah, it reveals where Muhammad got this idea from, of the sun setting into a muddy spring. He cites a poem by an ancient Yemeni king called Tubba, who lived at least 700 years before Muhammad. The poem was about Dhul Qarnayn. Roughly translated, it says, Dhul Qarnayn was a submitter before me, a king who was adored by kings. He reached the west and east, in roads laid down by the wise guide. So he saw the sun as it was setting, in a spring of black mud. We can now see where this story originates from. Is this all some grand coincidence? Is Islam really a hard test of faith? Or is it now simply becoming an easy test of gullibility and stubbornness? Now, the Bible also has...
Okay, so let's pause it there. No, actually, it's your incoherent arguments and ignorant fallacies that has absolutely no clue about Islamic history and about the Quran, obviously, because the Quran was sent as a dhikr, or as a reminder of the past. So it's going to narrate stories of the past, and if those stories are factually correct, it's going to remind us those stories. So that's not gullibility. I mean, if the Bible narrated something that happened 4,000 years ago in the time of Adam, are you going to now say, the New Testament is plagiarizing what Adam said? Of course you're not going to do that. So, I mean, come on, seriously with these arguments. And if you want to play the game of plagiarism, your Trinity was copied from Trimurti, the ancient Hindus believed 3,000 or 4,000 years ago before the Bible in a term of Trimurti, where they identified God to be triune and so forth. What about Binitarianism? It's a Jewish sect that believed in the two powers in heaven. Of course, they didn't identify the third. Can we now say that the Christian New Testament is now plagiarizing from the early Jewish sect, but then also adding a third entity to that? So again, with this plagiarism nonsense, your arguments do not stand up. The Bible could be shot.
A similar verse to this. It says, "The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises." This indicates that the sun rises and sets on the earth's surface.
So notice he's now quoting the Bible, right? In Ecclesiastes 1, he quotes that the Bible also narrates a similar story. Well, thank you for bringing the Bible up, because you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. Now, are we now going to interpret this verse in the Bible as literal, or we're going to interpret it as metaphorical? I bet after I criticize it, you'll say, oh, no, that's all about metaphorical. But you know what? The term literal or metaphorical does not even exist in that text. But maybe, as a critic, I could say it means it's literal and the Bible got it wrong. Can I do that? Look at what the verse says. It says the sun rises and the sun sets. Well, does the sun rise and set? No, it doesn't go up, nor does it go down. It's the earth that orbits the sun, and that's why it appears as though the sun rises and the sun sets, because we have a spherical earth and so forth. So can we now interpret that as an error? Can we do that? In fact, it even makes it worse, because it says in that verse that the sun hurries back to where it rose from. I mean, the sun doesn't hurry back, Mr. Sah al-Norm. It doesn't hurry back. How does the sun hurry back? The sun is fixated on its own axis, and it actually only spins on its axis. It doesn't go anywhere. It's the earth that hurries back and not the sun, right? So can we now criticize your Bible? Thank you for bringing it up. There you go. That's a contradiction. No. We're not going to interpret it as metaphorical. We're going to interpret it now as literal. And look what he says.
Where it rises. Now, granted, this is slightly more vague than the Quran, but it still implies this. Muslims are probably now looking at the Bible verse thinking, yeah, of course that one's an error. But the
Of course, yes, it is in error. But what?
Quran is perfect. I'm sure that there are answers to everything. Anyway,
Well, he didn't even try and defend the biblical position. Of course, the Quran or Islam has answers to everything. You've actually refuted yourself. I don't even know why you brought that verse up. You just made yourself look like a pansy. And listen, folks, look, I'm not attacking the Bible in the sense that, as the Christians are attacking the Quran. I can understand from a human perspective that God is telling me that this, the sun hurrying back and so forth, this is all supposed to be understood in metaphorical terms. We're human beings. Of course, it's only from how things appear to us is how God is describing the situation. And that's the same for Dhul Qarnayn. That's what appeared to him, but the Christians want to desperately claim that this means a literal perspective. Anyway, let's continue.
Let's move on and see when the first Muslim scholars begin to understand that the sun cannot physically set here on earth.
Okay, notice now he's quoting at 437H that, there is a difference of opinion, and he's even quoting that these scholars or historians and so forth actually brought differences of opinion on the subject. Some may have thought it was literal, some may have thought it was non-literal. Of course, they didn't have all the answers and so forth, so of course they're going to be opinionated. But you're very desperately trying to, make an argument through the tafsir, which is only based on opinions. Let's continue. So then, look, he proves our point. He brings up a narration to say that, there was differences of opinion.
Tafsir still has no clue. But with the 20th tafsir, we finally get there, a whopping 440 years after Muhammad's death. This tafsir actually talks about it being literal, and then says, but there's a second opinion. It may have set behind the watery horizon. The next tafsir, number 21, 450 years after Muhammad's death in the Islamic year 460, which corresponds to the Western year 1067. This tafsir, written by Al-Tusi, explains which clever Muslims eventually figured out the sun was too big to set in a muddy spring every evening. It tells us the Baghdadis eventually figured this out, but there was still dispute. A scholar called Ibn al-Akhshad rejected this new interpretation, despite contrary scientific evidence, saying, and I quote, "No, it does set in a muddy spring, exactly as the Quran clearly says." That was a quote. Again, it pulls the rug from underneath desperate Muslims who today claim that the Quran doesn't actually say that the sun is setting in a spring.
So notice who he quotes. He quotes a scholar, Al-Hakim. He quotes him, right? And he actually refuted his own argument. He clearly refuted his own argument. Sorry, his name is Ibn al-Akhshad, right? And so notice in this era, in this tafsir, where he says, it's whopping 450 years after, he says that there were differences of opinion even then, which proves our point. But then guess what he does? He uses Ibn al-Akhshad as a source to disprove that it wasn't meant to be understood in, non-literal terms. So notice he's actually quoting from a scholar whopping 450 years later to prove a point. But when Muslims do the same, oh no, that's just hypocritical, that's outside the date, that's just too far away, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this guy is really a joke, honestly.
Say that the sun is setting in a spring. They must be smarter at the Arabic language than all Muslim scholars combined in the 450 years following Muhammad's death, who are now getting schooled at classical Arabic by non-Arabs like Zakir Naik. Now, if you're a Muslim watching this video, I hope you are able to see the evidence that this verse did mean the sun sets into the earth is simply undeniable.
Actually, look how now he's going to be killed on this argument. Now, he's saying that the glossary, the Arabic, the Arabic linguistic Arabic and terminology through the tafsir and so forth, he's saying that, it's actually what the scholars believed in the Arabic. It's meant to be literal and so forth. But he's been crucified here, and I can take you through the comments where I actually engaged him. And I made a challenge to him. And I said to him, if the Muslims are getting the Arabic interpretation wrong, none of those scholars or historians have mentioned the Arabic term for literal within the verse. So if we go back to the verse, Surah 18, chapters 83 to 86, nowhere in that verse of the Quran does it actually use the word literal in the Arabic. And I actually challenged him in the comment section in this. So here, I'll read exactly what the what he said. Sa al-Num writes, he says, no, it's not the same for the Quran. He says, the tafsir in the video are from Muslims who know classical Arabic. They clearly say the sun sets in pool of murky water. It's literal. Okay, so his argument is it's not opinions, that these Muslims who understood classical Arabic thought or believed it was literal. Right? This is what he's claiming. So this was my challenge to him. I said to him, if a Muslim opinion on the Quran thinks it's literal, does not mean the Quran means it is literal. You do not understand the difference, don't you? Since when are opinions part of revelation? So now here comes a challenge. I said, show us where the Quran even uses the term literal. Where does it use it? So he replies back and says, no, it's not about opinions. It's about the Arabic language. So now he's saying that the Arabic language in the Quran, right, actually uses the term literal. Look how he's deceitfully even lying now. So he says, unless you are claiming to know better than classical Arabic than the 18 first tafsir that were written, all of them unanimously agree that the Quran teaches that the sun sets in a pool of murky water. No, they're actually teaching what the Quran is saying. They're not saying that it means in a literal term. So that's your own lies and absurd claims. The classical Arabic within the verse does not say that. And I even made this challenge to him. I said, if it's not about opinion, then bring us the classical Arabic word for the term literal. In the surah that says sun literally sets in murky water. Show us the Arabic word for literal. And you know what? It's been more than, say, 48 hours. He still hasn't replied to our point. You know, if he wants to make the claim that it is literal, then show us the verse. Where does it say that? Say al-num. It doesn't say in the actual verse. Nor does it say metaphorical. Look, I'll agree. I'll be honest and I'll say it doesn't say metaphorical either. Nor does it say literal. There's no Arabic word in there for metaphorical, nor is there an Arabic word for literal. So you can't then jump on the bandwagon and say that it is literal, unless you can prove it in the Quran, which doesn't say that. So, you know, I mean, we could play these games with Christianity as well. We can, you know, show him verses in the Bible that says stones even cry in Luke 19:40. We can show in Numbers 22 to 28, donkeys even start talking. You know, and you know, there are many metaphorical statements in the Quran. We know in Sahih Bukhari, it says that the sun even prostrates. Of course, it's understood as metaphorically. You know, we don't have to go into the minds of the companions to see whether they believe literally that the sun prostrates or is it metaphorically. Of course, one could understand metaphorically. And even if they believed it was literal, it doesn't mean that the Quran says it's literal. You understand my point? So, you know, we could play again with the Bible. In the Bible, it says in Luke 19:27, Jesus ordered his disciples to kill non-believers who do not accept Jesus as their king. Now, Christians will say that's a parable. But then when a Muslim brings up, you know, quotes John Gill's tafsir, right? And John Gill's tafsir says that no, it's not just a parable. It's a parable that explains literally the second coming of Christ, where he will damn those who do not accept him as king. And, you know, I'm just telling you that, you know, that he will come and he will kill those who do not accept Christ as Lord. So should we now take this as literal because a scholar has said it was literal? Okay, let's be consistent. Maybe then we can. So there is no peace in Christianity. Non-believers will be slaughtered on the second coming of Christ. That's according to scholar John Gill. And it makes it worse because Christians believe that their scholars have got the Holy Ghost. And the Holy Ghost guides them to the truth. So maybe John Gill was giving us the truth when he said Jesus will return and slaughter those who don't accept him. And watch, a Christian will cry and say, oh, that's just tafsir, that's just Christian commentary. We can't accept that. That's what they will say. See the double standards. So there you have it, folks. If you want to prove an argument, you need to go to the Quran directly. Then, of course, we will accept the hadith if it comes from a prophet's companion, clearly using the word literal. But you haven't even shown that. You've just said, oh, they narrate what the Quran says in the tafsir, in the first 12 or 11 tafsirs. But then again, they don't even mention the word literal. And even if they did, which companion said it? Was it a close companion? Was it Uthman? Was it Ibn Abbas? You can't even show that in your references. You can't even show it. And even if you do, it's still not part of Revelation. So you still butchered yourself. So you've been completely debunked, completely refuted. And like I said, you're desperate. You can't show us in the Quran. So you refer to the hadith. You get debunked at the hadith because the hadith shows differences of opinion. And then you've gone desperately to the tafsir. And again, you've exposed your inconsistencies, because the tafsir itself doesn't even say it in the first 11, and it only quotes what the Quran says. And even if beyond that in Tabari it speaks of it being literal, that can't be confirmed. And even if it is confirmed, it's still wrong, and it doesn't prove a point, because you need to show it from the Quran, and it doesn't show that, and it doesn't show it through the authentic hadith. So you have no argument here. Absolutely debunked. And my final point, of course, which I've completely crucified you on, is that show us the classical Arabic where it uses the term literal. And for that particular surah in 1883 to 86, it doesn't even have the Arabic word literal. So you've just been crucified again. Sorry, man, you've crucified yourself. I mean, I don't know what else to say. That's it. Until you can bring us the literal word, you have no argument, and I see that you've been defeated through your silence. Goodbye and good day.